My name is Carolyn Walker. I'm 62 years old, a retired schoolteacher, and a widow for the past 7 years. I live alone now in a modest home filled with memories, most of them shaped by the love I poured into raising my only son, David. A few months ago, I gifted David and his wife, Melanie, a fully paid house, no mortgage, no debt. I used my life savings and told myself it was a gift of love, a solid foundation for their growing family. I chose the paint colors, assembled furniture in my garage, and even sewed the curtains by hand. It wasn't just a house, it was a piece of me. So when I received a message from David that morning, my hands trembled in a way I hadn't felt since the day we buried his father. The screen glowed with a simple sentence. "You won't be joining us on the family cruise. Melanie prefers to keep it just family." Just family. And somehow I wasn't part of that anymore. I sat in my kitchen, surrounded by the scent of coffee I hadn't touched, reading the words again. My fingers felt stiff and cold. I typed a single word back.
Okay.
That word carried everything: the hurt, the shock, the realization. I pressed send, but inside, a voice was screaming. "So I was good enough to buy your house, but not good enough to sit at your dinner table. Not good enough to board your cruise ship." My heart pounded like a drum, but my face stayed still, calm, detached. In that moment, something inside me cracked. The part that made excuses for others. The part that stayed quiet to keep the peace. That part was gone. Morning light moved slowly across the floor, touching the kitchen chairs I had once refinished by hand. The same chairs David used to sit on with scraped knees and endless questions about the stars. That little boy was gone, and in his place stood a man who had quietly drawn a line I was no longer allowed to cross. The house felt unfamiliar now, like a museum of bad decisions. Photos hung on the walls, pictures I had paid to take, smiles from family vacations I had fully funded. Disneyland when David was 7. Cancun when Melanie first joined the family. A cozy cabin trip I insisted on paying for that Christmas, when they said money was tight. I told myself it was my gift to them. Now all I could see were receipts wrapped in photo frames. I thought back to their housewarming party last spring. The one I planned. The one I paid for. I remembered Melanie taking my hands with a tearful smile. "Carolyn, you didn't have to do this. We're so grateful. You'll always have a room here. You know that." And I believed her. Of course I did. Because mothers believe. It's what we do. I remembered the evenings spent repainting their master bedroom while they were at work. I chose soft lavender because Melanie said it was calming. I bought new curtains online and installed them myself. Every piece of furniture in that house carried my fingerprints. Every throw pillow, every lamp, every rug. I kept myself busy so I wouldn't have to face the quiet truth. They didn't call much. They rarely visited. I told myself they were just busy. That's what young couples do. They work hard, settle in, figure things out. But that wasn't the truth. The truth was heavier than paint cans and moving boxes. The truth was that I had made myself so useful to them that they stopped seeing me as a person. I became the fixer, the helper, the wallet. And once the money was spent, there wasn't much use for the woman attached to it. I had given too much for too long. In return, I had been quietly erased. The next morning, the silence in the house was unbearable. It wasn't the kind of quiet that soothed. It pressed on my chest, made my hands twitch, and reminded me that something was terribly wrong. I picked up the phone and called Nancy. She arrived within the hour. No questions, no hesitation, just like always. That's the thing about old friends. They know when to talk and when not to. She stepped into my kitchen, took one look at my face, and didn't need to ask what had happened. "Tell me," she said gently, setting her purse down. I slid my phone across the table so she could read the message herself. Her jaw tightened as she read. She didn't speak right away, just shook her head slowly, like she had expected this moment to come. "They've been planning this, Carolyn." I shook my head, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. I thought maybe it was just Melanie. Maybe she got into his head. But David, he's not like this. Nancy looked at me with that mix of love and honesty only a lifelong friend can give. She reached across the table and took my hand in hers. "You raised a good boy," she said. "But you also raised a boy who never had to struggle, who always had you fixing everything." Melanie saw that. She saw what she could shape him into. I looked away. "You made yourself small, Carolyn. And now they're treating you like you belong there." Her words hurt because they were true. I had stayed useful for so long. I forgot how to be seen. But something was shifting, and I was finally ready to be seen again. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Nancy's words echoing in my mind. They've been planning this. At 2:17 a.m., I got up and walked into the kitchen. The glow of my laptop screen filled the room as I sat down, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. For years, Melanie had handled most of my online accounts. "It's just easier," she'd say in that syrupy voice. "You shouldn't worry about these things in retirement." And I believed her. I wanted to believe she was helping. I wanted to believe I still mattered. But that night, I logged in with a different kind of awareness. At first glance, everything looked fine. My checking, savings, retirement accounts, all intact. Nothing stood out. But that's how it works, isn't it? The danger hides behind the ordinary. So I dug deeper. And there they were. Multiple transfers, small amounts spread over time, labeled things like property maintenance, home repair, emergency fund. But I hadn't approved any emergency repairs. I hadn't authorized any linked payments. I clicked further. The destination accounts weren't in my name. They were in Melanie's. She had added herself as a secondary user. Quietly. Smoothly. She had been skimming for me, bleeding my account slowly so it wouldn't raise alarms. So this wasn't just thoughtlessness. This was theft with a smile. And David, was he blind? Or did he simply not care as long as the money kept flowing? I leaned back in my chair, my heart racing, not with fear, but with something colder and sharper. A clear realization settled into me like ice. They weren't planning to hurt me later. They were already doing it. And they thought I'd never notice. But I had noticed. And I wasn't going to stay quiet anymore. By morning, my mind was made up. No more silence. No more waiting for another betrayal. It was time to act. I called Mr. Harris, my attorney. He had handled my affairs for years. My will, my retirement planning, even the paperwork when I transferred the house to David and Melanie. He answered right away. "Mrs. Walker, good to hear from you. Everything all right?" "No," I said calmly, "and that's why I need to see you today." He cleared his schedule. Within hours, I was sitting across from him in his office, my hands folded neatly in my lap. "I want to reverse the house transfer," I told him. "Lock down every account. Cancel all powers of attorney. Every single one." He paused, not because he disagreed, but because he understood what that meant. "This could cause tension," he said gently. "They already caused tension," I replied. I was just too blind to see it. He nodded. "Very well. We'll begin the reversal process. But Carolyn, if you suspect financial abuse, we'll need evidence. Detailed records." "I have some," I said, sliding a printed spreadsheet across the table. "And I want more." He raised an eyebrow. "Are you open to hiring a private investigator?" I didn't hesitate. "Hire whoever you trust." He nodded again. "Then we move quickly." As I walked out of his office, something inside me had shifted. It wasn't just about stopping them anymore. It was about reclaiming myself, quietly, methodically, and with a strength they never saw coming. That afternoon, I returned home and sat at the kitchen table, the sun warming my face. For the first time in weeks, my hands didn't shake. They thought I would stay quiet. They thought I was still the woman who signed anything placed in front of her with a polite smile. But that woman was gone, and the one who replaced her had no intention of being erased. The next morning, I found an envelope slipped under my front door. White. Plain. Familiar. Melanie always used envelopes like that when she sent over paperwork she'd helped organize for me. On top sat a yellow sticky note in her looping handwriting. "Just sign whenever you're ready, Mom. It'll make everything easier while we're away." I hadn't heard the front door open, which meant they had probably sent someone else, perhaps before leaving for their cruise. They were already gone, floating on sapphire blue water, sipping cocktails and smiling for photos. Meanwhile, this small envelope waited on my kitchen counter, patient, like a trap. I opened it carefully. The documents inside were professionally typed, neat, precise. At first glance, they looked harmless. Routine updates, estate simplifications, household authorizations. But as I read line by line, my stomach tightened. Buried deep in the legal language was a new power of attorney. Permanent. Irrevocable. It would give Melanie complete control, not just over my finances, but my property, my medical decisions, even the authority to place me in a care facility without my consent. They weren't waiting for me to grow old or weak. They were preparing to take everything while I was still alive. This wasn't about inheritance. It was about control. I stared at the papers for a long moment, then slowly placed them back into the envelope. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I stood still, one hand resting on the counter, letting the weight of it all settle. Then I whispered into the quiet kitchen, as if speaking to the woman I used to be. You almost signed this. Almost. But not today. Today I saw it for what it was. And I would use this document not to surrender, but as evidence. They thought they were 2 steps ahead. But I had just caught up, and I was already turning the tide. By noon, I was back in Mr. Harris's office. This time, there was no small talk. He saw my face and simply nodded. They tried to slip this under my door while they were on a cruise, I said, handing him the envelope. He opened it slowly, his eyes narrowing as he read. When he reached the section on irrevocable authority, he exhaled sharply. This isn't just unethical, he said. It's predatory. If I had signed this, I replied, they could have sold my home, drained my accounts, even admitted me into a care facility, all while smiling to my face. He studied me, waiting for panic. It never came. Let's move faster, I said firmly. His expression shifted, respect replacing concern. We already have most of the paperwork prepared, he said. The reversal of the house deed is filed. The asset freeze is underway. The investigator has started a full financial audit, but after seeing this, he tapped the envelope. We'll take more aggressive steps. Lock down every account. No one touches your assets without your signature. I nodded. And one more thing, he added. We're drafting a protective clause. If they attempt any legal coercion, we'll have a complete timeline of manipulation ready for court. I leaned back in the chair, my breathing steady, my shoulders relaxed. For the first time in years, I wasn't reacting. I was building. And I was building something they wouldn't see until it stood between us like a wall. When I returned home that afternoon, the house looked the same, but everything had changed. Because I had changed. The woman who once paid for everything in hopes of being loved was gone. In her place stood someone done apologizing for surviving. Someone who finally understood that peace doesn't come from being accepted. It comes from protecting your boundaries and knowing your worth. And now I was protecting both. 4 days later, their cruise ship docked. I was already there. I parked a block away and stood quietly across the street, watching as David and Melanie arrived, tanned and relaxed, luggage piled high in the trunk. Melanie stepped out first, barking orders about scheduling the mortgage finalization. David followed, scrolling through his phone, detached as always. Then they froze. 2 unfamiliar cars sat in the driveway. A moving van. A young couple stood near the front door, laughing with a realtor as boxes were unloaded. It took a moment for reality to sink in. David spoke first. Mom. His voice trembled, confused, uncertain. Melanie's face tightened. What's going on? Who are these people? I stepped forward, slow and steady. You won't have to manage anything for me anymore, I said. Her tone sharpened. What does that mean? David looked around in panic. Why are there people in our house? It's not your house, I replied evenly. Not anymore. Melanie rushed toward me, her voice rising. You can't do this. We're refinancing. We have contracts. I reached into my bag and handed David a folder. These are the only contracts that matter. He opened it with shaking hands, flipping through the pages. House reversal documents. Sale paperwork. financial audit reports, copies of unauthorized transactions. Melanie ripped the folder from his hands, scanning the pages like a drowning woman searching for air. She looked up, eyes blazing. None of this will hold up. We were helping you. You'll regret this. I met her stare. You mean draining my accounts while smiling to my face? Filing legal authority behind my back? Listing my home as collateral while I sat in the dark? David whispered. We didn't mean. I raised my hand.
No.
You didn't mean to get caught. The silence that followed cut deeper than shouting ever could. Then I pulled out a second folder and handed it to Melanie. Inside were complete legal records, every forged signature, every act of financial abuse, every coercive tactic. If you take me to court, I said calmly, this becomes public record. They stood frozen, pale, defeated. I looked at David, my son, and spoke my final words. I was your mother. You made me your target. Then I turned and walked away. I didn't look back. I drove home slowly, the sun sinking behind the rooftops. My new apartment was modest. No marble counters, no carefully curated furniture. But it was mine. Fully mine. I placed my phone face down on the table, ignoring David's final message, one last plea disguised as regret. I had nothing left to give. And in that emptiness, I found something I hadn't felt in years. Freedom. They thought I would fall apart without them. The truth was, I had been buried beneath them for far too long. Quiet doesn't mean weak. It means listening. And now I speak only for me.